This video is supported by the lovely people on Patreon. Stick around to the end to learn more.
The quest for knowledge is our sacred task. Ours is to not understand or question. Ours is to possess, to reclaim, to seize. Ours is the logic and the power.
Science fiction and fantasy settings have always had a fascination with the idea of people becoming more machine than human. Now, in series like Fullmetal Alchemist and Star Wars, they tend to argue that going too far and trying to replace your flesh is a bad thing, while other series like Mega Man and Cyberpunk made it so that humans and machines becoming one was an endpoint that couldn't be avoided. But they still talk about the horrors that got us there and want you to decide for yourself if it's a good or bad. However, with Warhammer 40k, the Adeptus Mechanicus takes it even further than the most extreme ideas. The Mechanicus were always more of a background element in Warhammer 40k. Although they had playable models in Rogue Trader, and later got updates in 3rd and 7th edition, 7th edition finally gave the Engineers of the Imperium an independent army to play, by doing a stupid thing and putting their Skitarii units in one book and their elite units and leaders in another. In universe, for a long time, the Mechanicus was always just that distant force that made the Imperium's tanks, maintain their Titans, and when talking to any of the engineers, you just got a face full of binary noises and hymns to a machine god. Later on, the Mechanicus got more fleshed out, thanks to their book called Mechanicum. We finally got an in-depth look at the Mechanicus, how they work, the nature of their beliefs and practices, and what their relationship with the Imperium is, giving us readers a good deep dive into how something like the Imperium would not only allow the religious technomancers of the Mechanicus to live, but be partners with them. It also went on to explain why members within the Mechanicus would also rebel against the Imperium if given the choice. But how did something like the Mechanicus get formed anyway? What is this Omnissiah that they claim to serve? Why are they obsessed with replacing their limbs and bodies with metal? Why haven't I realized the weakness of my flesh? Well, let's get into our first major Imperial faction and talk about the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Mechanicus story really begins early on, during the early colonization of Mars, during humanity's Golden Age. As the first planet humanity colonized and terraformed, Mars would become a powerful player in the Sol system. Their industrial centers became powerhouses in designing, developing, and building new technology, including weapons, robots, and vehicles. They even began to send out colony ships of their own to set up more Mars-style factories in other places. However, then something called the Age of Strife happened. The Age of Strife in Warhammer is a time where we only have the broad strokes of what happened. Basically, a mixture of things that hindered or outright stopped long-distance space travel plagued the galaxy. Humans called Psychers were being born in vast numbers, whose new powers couldn't be accounted for or trained properly. So they destroyed many worlds, and other things like the Men of Iron rising up to rebel against us. Because let's see if you like having cards shoved down your throat or sucking up debris on your floor. Mars, even though it was an industrial powerhouse, also began to struggle and eventually collapse. The planet's shield generators protecting them from radiation collapsed, and the world was bombarded by solar radiation, killing whatever ecosystem the colonists had built and destroying major population centers. The survivors found their world as a hellscape of radiation, mutants, and cannibals. And the red world wasn't just red from dust now, but from destroyed and rusted machines, factories, and old technology. In this new hostile environment, the survivors would be rallied under a new belief. The belief of the machine. The survivors began to revere any machine or technology that helped with their survival, going out of their way to salvage anything they could from specialized bunkers, weapons, and so on. Many would die fighting against mutants and remaining functional machines that stalk the wastelands, but through this suffering, the cult Mechanicum would rise up to become the dominant power on Mars, with its tech priests spouting worship to the machine god, the Omnissiah. This religion eventually came to dominate Mars, and the people would begin to thrive again, getting the ancient factories and technology online again to serve their purposes. They even got to the point where they began to send out exploration fleets again. The power of Mars was second only to a force that would appear on Terra, the Emperor of Mankind. The Emperor of Mankind, who was launching his great crusade, understood that if he wanted his plans to succeed, he needed the industrial might of Mars. Even though his growing Imperium abhorred religion in all forms, he had to make an exception for the Mechanicus. He couldn't afford to get stuck in a war with them and damage the facilities he wanted to use. So he went down to Mars and convinced the Mechanicum that he was the Omnissiah, by first making it rain on the Red Planet for the first time in centuries, and fixing any machine he touched instantly. This convinced major sections of the population that the Emperor really was the Omnissiah, or at least that he was a vessel or herald for it. Others, however, like the eventual Fabricator General of Mars, Kelbor Hall, mostly saw through the Emperor's spectacle, seeing him as a false prophet. But there wasn't much they could do about it, with seeds of fear and doubt being planted in many that Mars would become a slave state to the Imperium, or worse, wiped out entirely once their use came to an end. These fears would also deepen when the Emperor ordered that specific ancient vaults on Mars be sealed forever. The Mechanicus were all about finding and learning about ancient technology. Kelbor Hall and many others saw denying them these ancient vaults as the Emperor denying them their God-given right to bring those ancient machines and their technology back into the fold. Though the Emperor had good reasons to lock some of these things away, due to understanding of the dangers, but he failed to explain the dangers behind the vaults. Over time, though, the Mechanicus would become a staunch ally to the Imperium. Any ancient technology found would be sent back to Mars. Any industrial worlds that were found by the Imperium would quickly be brought into the fold under Mars's banner, and the Imperial Titans and Knights would be loyal to both the Imperium and Mechanicus, though the Titans and Knights were more loyal to the Mechanicus due to obvious reasons. However, in M31001, the Horus Heresy began, with the Emperor's favorite son Horus Lupercal leading 9 of the 18 Space Marine legions into rebellion, along with half the Empire. The Mechanicus would be a major part of this rebellion, as Kelbor Hall was now Fabricator General of Mars. However, Kelbor thought he was smart and wanted to play both sides of the war, as he also didn't trust Horus at all. But Horus had Kelbor infected by something called scrap code, a form of demonic technological virus that fully corrupted the machine man to Horus's side and made him a loyal ally. The Horus Heresy divided the Mechanicus in an extremely uneven fashion. Many joined Kelbor Hall's Dark Mechanicum, either due to personal reasons or because they were corrupted by the scrap code. Mars itself was taken over by the Dark Mechanicum, with the Imperial Fifth Legion having to evacuate whatever loyal Mechanicus personnel, technology, and Titans were left, and then proceed to blockade the Red Planet for the entirety of the Horus Heresy. However, other Mechanicus-held worlds over the galaxy either sided with the traitor legions or stood against them, wanting to become independent entirely from the Imperium and its Space Marines, or staying loyal due to a fanatic loyalty to the Omnissiah. This civil war within the Mechanicum would see technology that had been long preserved destroyed, hidden, or being used as the standard issue for the Mechanicus from then on. However, the heresy would end with the Imperium's victory over the traitors, with the Dark Mechanicum fleeing with the traitor legions into the Eye of Terror, or other safe havens within the galaxy. This betrayal of the machine god would massively influence the Mechanicus, making them even more dogmatic in their beliefs that technology was sacred and should be preserved. This also changed their relationship with the Imperium. Even though the two were partners and knew one couldn't really exist without the other, they are allies, but there are massive rifts of trust between the two. The only Imperial groups the Mechanicus really trust are those who they have massive influence over or close relationships with. These groups are knight houses that are aligned to them, or Space Marine chapters like the Iron Hands. Even in modern 40k, the Mechanicus still acts like this, though some members like Call and Thulia Gold have been shaking up the Mechanicus massively. Now, let's get into the Mechanicus' culture and beliefs. Now, as I said, the Mechanicus revere the machine, to the point where most of the Mechanicus priests argue that machines are perfect and should never be changed. That means any technology that is found, or is in current service, should not be changed, altered, or improved in any way. The Omnissiah made them, and God can never be wrong. As well, many in the Mechanicus believe that if it wasn't made by human hands, it deserves to be destroyed. So any form of xenotechnology or demonic technology is usually destroyed on sight. This worship of the machine also extends to the self as well. You see, the Mechanicus believe that the flesh is inherently weak, that our flesh and blood bodies should be changed to those of cold steel and oil. Most individuals in the Mechanicus will have their bodies augmented in some way. Some will have simple changes like robotic legs, hands, or eyes, nothing you wouldn't see in a game like Cyberpunk. Then there are others who go full hog into changing their bodies, with some altering their lower half to look like mechanical spiders, or giving themselves tank-like treads, while some add on to their bodies more and more, until they are basically just a brain inside a machine. This, of course, weirds out many of their allies, as the Imperium has a massive distrust for machines. Sure, they actively use technology, but if that shit starts thinking or talking on its own, it's getting thrown to the nearest sun. Now, the Mechanicus also abhor AI, as sentient machines are an affront to the Omnissiah, or at least, that's what the Mechanicus claims. Another part of the Mechanicus' culture is exploration and preservation. The Mechanicus' main military force is called the Expeditionary Fleets. These fleets are usually either on their own exploring the galaxy, or attached to massive Imperial Crusade fleets. The goal of these fleets is to find and secure lost technology, and return to their forge worlds on Mars, with the spoils eventually being shared with the Imperium. At least, if they force the issue, and the Mechanicus agrees that another Imperial faction would benefit from it. However, these fleets over the years, and the Mechanicus in general, have had minor to massive arguments about their faith, as any religion does. Remember how I said the Mechanicus are extremely dogmatic when it comes to their beliefs? Well, as we find out all the time, there are exceptions to the rules. Many within the Mechanicum do hate Xenos technology, AI, and modifying or improving already present technology. However, you will also find many who will make arguments in favor of these technologies, or making exceptions for creating updated versions if they prove to work. For example, the Space Marine Land Raider Crusader was a modified version of the Land Raider, swapping out its main anti-tank cannons for rows of bolters. This made the tank perfect for tight quarter city fighting, and without the need for batteries to power las cannons, it was able to fit more infantry inside it. This version of the Land Raider was quickly adopted by many Space Marine chapters, and the Mechanicus eventually sanctioned its use, as it proved time and time again to be a useful addition to the Space Marine armory. In another case of someone getting away with modifying stuff, Belisarius Call made the argument that he is not inventing anything. If anti-gravity technology already existed, he is not doing anything to improve on the design. He is just slapping the technology onto things that he deems would be more useful, such as the Space Marine's new Gladiator tanks that use anti-grav technology to move around. His reasoning, the support of the High Lords of Terra, and the usefulness of his creations keeps the ancient tech priest from getting his skull caved in by his more conservative compatriots. However, then we get to the more extreme and fringe members of the Mechanicus, those who try to use AI and Xenos technology. We have seen success stories with weapons like the Xenophase Blade, which is a mixture of Necron and Imperial technology, or in other cases, they're just inspired by some alien designs. You cannot tell me that some Tau designs didn't inspire some of the newer Primaris stuff. But then there are those who go even further, like in Space Marine 2, where the tech priest Luz tried to make the Blackstone pylon technology work for the Imperium. These beliefs often clash within the Mechanicus, whether it be with verbal debates or civil wars that can leave either planets or whole sectors without Mechanicus support. There are many cases where even a small difference of opinion or belief can cause whole Forge worlds to be blown off the map, as evidenced when the Mechanicus Civil War broke out, because one side believed that you could communicate with the Omnissiah through radio waves, and the other did not, leaving scars so deep that even the Space Marine chapters are feeling it into modern 40k. But let's talk about some of these different Mechanicus Forge worlds now. In the Mechanicus, the major world, of course, is Mars. Most Forge worlds in the Imperium, if not all of them, declare loyalty to Mars and follow most of its doctrines. Hell, everything I've been telling you is basically how Mars functions within the Imperium. So the standard military of Mars and its Forge worlds are the Skitarii legions and the Mechanicus cohorts. Skitarii are the augmented foot soldiers of the Mechanicus. They are either willing servants who were augmented for war, conscripted workers or criminals who were forced into becoming lobotomized foot sloggers, or vat-born humans who were designed for it. They make up the main fighting force for the Mechanicus, with their augmentations allowing a single commander to hand out orders and data over wide stretches, so that their units follow those programmed commands to the letter, making the Mechanicus ground forces an arguably well-oiled machine, so long as the commander is alive to give the orders. However, each cohort comes from a different Forge world, and all have different ways of engaging in warfare. Forge World Lucius is one of the more advanced Forge worlds. The materials used and the nature of their forges are unknown to the wider Mechanicus, but they have pumped out some of the best and most advanced weapons out of all of the Mechanicus. Their units tend to use more solar-based weapons and designs, giving them defensive abilities and strategies that make them second to none among the Mechanicus. Forge World Agrippina focuses more on close-range warfare, due to their close proximity to the Eye of Terror and the forces of chaos. Their units are well disciplined, and have protocols so thorough that they always know where to aim to cause the most damage, and form perfect firing or defensive lines to blunt an enemy charge, making their enemies easier to annihilate when their Skitarii pull away for their heavier guns to capitalize on the blunted assault. Forge World Graia is the more disciplined of the Forge worlds. Their commanders are logical and cold, to the point where even other Forge worlds are disturbed by them. They fully believe that their victory is certain by the Omnissiah's will, and their units will keep fighting no matter what harm has come to them, making them the masters of attrition warfare among the Forge worlds. Forge World Ryza is a Forge world that won't hesitate to use some of the most ancient and destructive technology hidden on their world. Bearing witness to the holy destruction that the Omnissiah's gifts bring to their enemies, this has made the forces of Ryza eager to shed blood in the Omnissiah's name any chance they get, which is extremely common, as their world is close to the Maelstrom Zone and a few other major conflicts within the 40k universe. Last but not least is Forge World Metallica, who consider themselves to be the most pure and loyal to the Omnissiah. These zealots are so fanatical in their devotion that they consider even the Priesthood of Mars to be impure, and have little to no influence from Mars among their forces. They march to war wearing pure white, with only the faintest hint of red, purging anything they deem impure from holy sites and relics, or even their own allies if they deem it so. Now, let's talk about the Mechanicus in modern 40k before we wrap up. The Mechanicus in modern 40k is in a time where their beliefs are being challenged, both externally and internally. With the galaxy being split in half, Forge Worlds on the other side of the Great Rift have to rely on themselves more and more, due to not being able to communicate with Mars, while other Forge Worlds were lost to the Great Rift swallowing them whole, or falling to groups like the Gene Stealer cults, Dark Mechanicum, or other threats. The Imperium's demand for war material has expanded drastically, and many within the Mechanicum have been forced to swallow the ideas of radicals, like Belisarius Cawl and Thulia Gold, having more influence on how things go. Cawl has the support of the Emperor's son, Rabute Gilliman, while Thulia's Gold's brutality and casual violence has become more and more popular among the Skitarii legions. These changes have forced the Mechanicus to look inward, and some are beginning to either double down on their conservative values, or try to experiment more to give Mars and its Forge Worlds an extra edge. However, what is more disturbing is the recent reveals of what the Omnissiah actually is. It turns out that the Omnissiah is a fragment of the Necron Catan known as the Void Dragon, with pieces of the Catan shard maybe being the machine spirit that the Mechanicum proclaims is in every vehicle within the Imperium, which would explain why weapons, vehicles, and other technology within the Imperium can be temperamental. A shard of the Void Dragon was supposedly imprisoned on Mars long ago by the Emperor, and so far, it appears to still be trapped on Mars. With these new threats and challenges, the Mechanicus find themselves in a galaxy pulling them apart, with internal politics causing constant civil strife, while their Skitarii legions and fleets are put under more pressure to find and defend ancient or lost technology, and their forces being further divided among Gilliman's Torchbearer fleets to help find lost worlds after the 13th Black Crusade. However, the Mechanicum did not buckle to the Age of Strife. They endured the Horus Heresy, and even now Cawl, Thulia Gold, and others fully believe that the Mechanicus will survive these dark times, for the machine is immortal. In the tabletop game, the Mechanicus functions as a more elite infantry army. Their units hit harder and have better armor than their allies in the Imperial Guard. They focus on swapping from aggressive strategies to defensive strategies on the fly with their doctrines, giving them the abilities to keep firing on the move or shoot better when holding still, with their melee units being able to move fast and clean up anyone that survives the ranged onslaught. The Mechanicus is a popular and well-loved faction within 40k. Their unique gothic tech punk design has made them extremely popular among Imperial players. The Mechanicus have a hand in the Imperial Guard, Space Marines, and even the Imperial Knights. Hell, people love the Mechanicus so much that we have both Imperial and Chaos fans begging for the other side of the coin, the Dark Mechanicum, to be playable in 40k as well. Now that we've entered the realm of the Imperium and Chaos, the next Need to Know poll will have a mix of Chaos and Imperial factions to talk about. So if you want to say on what we talk about, join the Patreon. It's only $5 a month, and you not only get to vote on what we talk about, but get access to exclusive series like Space Marine chapter breakdowns and Battletech mech reviews. If you can't join because money is tight, don't sweat it. Subscribing, sharing this video around, and liking it also helps massively. But until then, everyone, I'll see you all next time.